I thought it'd be a good idea to take a deep dive, step by step, sort of a 101 approach to plasma physics. There's been a lot of discussion of electric universe theory, and I've been doing like these deep dive research investigations into old world architecture. And so on the one hand, it's like what happened and where did it go and who built it and when. So on my channel on YouTube, Marvelous Old World, I've looked really carefully into Seattle and more recently Port Townsend, and did a series, really kind of like a forensics approach to what happened to the old world and how far back do these buildings really go. So that's one side. And on the other side is what were these buildings doing? And Matt and I have talked on his show quite a bit about like electric architecture, ethereal architecture, I've started to call it. There's been a lot of talk over the years about ANTIQUITECH. And so where I'm coming from is, and I have no background in physics. So I'm coming at this as a layman who's just trying to sort it out. Like I started studying physics at a deeper level just so that I could try to understand these questions. And, so I had the double task of learning a bit about mainstream physics and at the same time studying plasma physics. And the go-to place for me has been the Thunderbolts project. Now
you probably, sorry if I could just say, Matt, in my humble opinion, not to put the pressure on you, but whatever you're about to discuss and or present is probably going to be more accurate than what most mainstream physicists touch. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Well, and I'm really glad to bring it here because like Dave, you're a wealth of knowledge and, in between. And so I figure what I do is just present a slide, just kind of introduce the topic, and then we can riff. Okay. And then I'll listen to what all of you have to say. So what I'm introducing is electric universe theory versus mainstream physics. And on the one hand, we have, what the mainstream brings us with its grid and its scarcity and its mess. And on the other hand, we have electric universe theory, which is based on just an infinite access to an infinite source of divine energy. So on the one hand, we have, with the electric universe theory, it's premised upon experimentation and observation, which is the old alchemical tradition, right? And on the other hand, we have theoretical mathematics, where we have a high priest class, and they're the only ones that are credentialed enough to interpret phenomena through more and more, just throwing more and more equations at it. Yeah, and also what's so special about electric universe theory is that any child can understand it because you can see it, you can touch it, you can experience it. So this also goes back to our direct experience. And I might add too, for me, I grew up Christian, just a little side note here. And then I divorced myself from that when, in my 20s, and I embraced atheism, and I'm full swing back into, this embrace of spirituality and a sense of divinity. And with this electric universe or plasma theory, there's a science behind spirit and a spirituality behind science. This has been a false dichotomy all along. So with electric universe theory, we have ether energy. And there's a lot of terms that could stand in for ether. I like the term ether. It dovetails nicely with energy. We have prana, we have chi, it's that ethereal primordial soup that we're all part of, the matrix that we all exist within, versus mainstream physics gives us the vacuum of space. And it also implies that we're disparate objects floating around separate from one another, whether it's planets or whether it's human beings. Any science sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
And just a note about this Michelson-Morley experiment, they based their dismissal of the ether on an experiment that was done with light in 1880 technology. Yes. So toroids. So we have the Big Bang, Genesis, versus the cycles of time, that reality folds back in on itself. And you mentioned toroidal fields,
Right.
right?
Like
And so
a
it's almost
Mobius
like
field. Yeah.
the Big Bang. Can you see my mouse here? It's almost like they're just dealing with like one half of the equation. They're dealing with the outward emanation, but they're not, they haven't zoomed out enough on the phenomena.
I'm gonna
Experience
cry.
all reality.
You've
Oh
nailed
yeah.
more than most physicists that I've seen. This is great.
So, one I think really critical aspect of electric universe theory is the nature of stars and most immediately our sun. So what we have from the mainstream is that a star is a nuclear furnace that's organized through gravity, gravitational accretion of like a nebula cloud. And then there's sufficient inward pressure that it starts the nuclear combustion process. But one thing that's, well, there's a lot of things that are really problematic with it, is that when they look into sunspots, they see darkness, which indicates cool, closer to the core. Whereas the surface, I think, is like something like 6,000 degrees Celsius, but the corona is millions of degrees Celsius. So if it's a nuclear furnace where how can it be a nuclear furnace if the closer you get to the center, the cooler it gets, and the further away you get, the hotter it gets by extreme orders of magnitude? So the EU answer to that is that stars are like pearls on a string. They're organized along what they refer to as Birkeland currents, that are giant plasma filaments that drift through space. I mean, we're talking like at the largest scale imaginable, and that they act like strings, and along those strings there's pinch points where you have these interweaving filaments. Well, and just to kind of tie a bow on it, if we look at it electrically, that stars, basically what this is suggesting is that stars are powered from without, which could provide an answer for why it's hotter in the corona.
God, I love this. I love this show. You guys are incredible.
Now, we have, on the one hand, we have gravity plus dark matter, and I'll explain that in a moment, versus gravitation and radiation, which we get from Walter Russell. Now, gravity plus dark matter is because, as I understand it, they were able to finally observe galaxies. And what they couldn't understand was how galaxies just don't spin themselves apart through centripetal force. If they were organized simply through gravity alone, and the mainstream puts forward that gravity is the strongest force in the universe, and galaxies, solar systems, planets, stars are organized primarily, again, through gravitational accretion. But if that were true, the galaxies would spin themselves apart unless there was a counter force sufficient to hold it together. Hence, dark matter, something we can't see, we can't experiment upon. We can only, again, go refer to the mathemagicians. What I love about this, also the Walter Russell diagram, is that comports with what we experience. It's the inward and outward breath. It's the yin and yang, as above, so below. So now we have light, just the nature of light. And on the one hand, the mainstream, there's a particle wave duality, versus the electric universe theory puts forward that it's neither. Light is an agitation of the ether. And like Nikola Tesla, the way he put it is, light is nothing but a sound wave in the ether. You know what this makes me think of too is entanglement, or this idea of spooky action at a distance. And it's like, it had them scratching their heads, or Einstein didn't like this idea, right, of quantum entanglement, where you can manipulate an electron here, and then, I don't know, 1,000 miles away, the entangled electron is affected.
Yep.
But if we have, you mentioned the word fluid, if we have this etheric fluid, then there's a medium through which they can be instantaneously attached.
Exactly.
To electric architecture, and this idea of electroculture has been floating around. And so, what are practical applications of all this, plasma theory, electric universe theory that we're talking about. We look at ANTIQUITECH in old world architecture, and then there's also this idea that we can, tap into this all around us, free all the time, etheric energy, and bring it down and supercharge our plants, pyramids, hyper focus, electromagnetic energy, and these stone towers. And I might have even been to this particular one in Ireland. And then there's, a lot of talk about how the crops and the grass around these stone towers grows extremely well. So yeah, that's it.